Mr. Blumenthal mentions conflicts of interest in this interview. I wonder if he has any. I know CNBC certainly does.
All right, let's bring in Connecticut Attorney General Richard Blumenthal. Thanks to you for joining us. Let's, get right to the issue that we were just talking about. What do you think of what you heard?
I agree completely that the minimum net worth requirement should be raised, and I am thankful that the SEC has a pending rule that would do so. It certainly is a step in the right direction, but these guidelines, as they're called, offer very little guidance. They're at such a high level of generality.
That was our impression as well. Would you have made them a lot more specific?
A lot more teeth and a lot more specificity is
like
what's
what?
needed. Well, for example, on disclosure, risk strategies, whether it involves leveraging or debt or, for example, investment in natural gas futures, which is exactly what made for Amaranth's trouble. Those kinds of changes in strategies ought to be disclosed to investors, and there should be an obligation to do so. That kind of risk strategy disclosure should be required where there are major changes. And I think more than anything else, what's needed is guidelines that enhance the transparency. Opaque, as Chairman Cox used it, is the operative word right now with respect to many of these investment pools, specifically hedge funds.
But Richard, can you really do that? I mean, you and I had a really spirited discussion last night about Bulldog Investment on the money. And, one of the big problems is how can you really keep up with the speed of hedge funds and the speed of traders as a government body?
Nobody wants to constrain hedge funds because of the many good things they do in the markets, providing liquidity, compensating or correcting market inefficiencies, short selling, leveraging, all are part of hedge fund operations. But there are ways to provide better access for investors. Right now, the guidelines...
Like what? Give me a specific.
Well, a specific would be disclosure, for example, of who the auditor is, what the auditor's conflicts are, what strategies are going to be employed in the course of investing, whether it's commodities or other kinds of specific strategies. Those kinds of informational items and informational resources should be provided. And my feeling is that, and here's really the important point from a state regulator's standpoint and a state enforcer's standpoint, there will be efforts on the parts of states to try to provide for greater transparency if the federal government fails to do more than these guidelines.
Interesting. Like what? What would you then go ahead and do? I mean, that sounds like you're saying you're going to take action if the federal government doesn't.
Well, our legislature right now is considering measures that would provide for mandatory disclosure in exactly the area I've just mentioned. For example, strategies without requiring that specifics in investments be disclosed. For example, specifics in the commodities or the companies, but simply greater disclosure in terms of strategies and more truthful and accurate disclosure, which again was Amaranth's problem. So I think there are movements in that direction. I have not endorsed specifically any of these measures because I really hope it will be done at the federal level. My preference is that the federal government demonstrate initiative, and I think Chairman Cox has been certainly cognizant and publicly recognizing this responsibility on the part of the federal government. And so I'm hoping that the federal agencies will continue moving in that direction.
Are you telling hedge funds in Connecticut to, in effect, watch out?
No, I'm not telling them to watch out. I've been talking to a lot of very responsible hedge fund managers, as well as investors and others in the industry, and I'm encouraged that they are more and more aware.
All right. Thank you so much, Richard Blumenthal. As always, thank you so much for joining.